So let me stop sharing, and Victor, you can do the intro.
Okay.
And the
The
first
intro
question
is
is like, why, and you have to cover in the intro, like, why did you decided to take time away from the family and fun things? And I think you have a daughter. I think I saw in a video, or um,
yeah.
from that to sit down and write a book, which is so I think that's the first one.
Uh, why? It's a complicated answer because our documentation is horrible. And I thought if I improve the documentation, that I would be in charge of documentation forever and ever, and that I did not want to do that. So instead of improving our documentation, I wrote a book.
Yeah.
That's the story of it, right? Kind of how to avoid being labeled as something, right? Just by not doing it,
Okay.
but still fixing it in a way, right?
How
Yep.
much time did it take to write this book?
Uh, it did not take long. It took me probably a month or two. So I wrote like 7, 8, 9 books. I don't know anymore. Uh, that they would take me anything between half a year and a year.
Okay. Wow.
But in case of Crossplane, I worked a lot with it. I had examples. I developed a lot of things for it myself, independently of the book. So book was more like kind of, okay, let me actually put the things that I have from before in a more structured way, right? So it was relatively, it was really kind of Christmas project type of.
I guess you had
right?
a lot of material from your YouTube channels
Yeah, YouTube
over the
channel,
years, so you could
and
compile them together. And
Exactly. I mean, I did write all the examples from scratch and wrote everything from scratch. So everything started from scratch, but based on everything I was doing over the last couple of years. So it was when you just start writing, but then it goes fast. No, not. I did not spend time on what's the word? My brain stopped. The investigation, right?
yeah,
Figuring out things. And
you
things like that.
you didn't have to look for the subject matter expert. You are the matter
Exactly.
expert.
Exactly. There you go.
And
There you
also
go.
serve as a promotion, right? I think you released it through by KubeCon, and a lot of people went to your booth to get a signed copy. So it was
Yeah,
very
yeah,
popular for that.
yeah. I mean, the goal with I pity any old book author that thinks that he or she is going to write book to earn money, kind of like that. That's not the goal. Kind of like, oh no. So yeah, it mostly goes away in one way or another.
Yep.
I
And
have
at
a
least for
question
me,
about.
it's useful to have a
Sorry.
resource to give someone like I work for AWS, and some of the customers ask for like cross-plane material or educational material. Now I have like do this book like in a weekend, and then you'll be up to speed, at least hands-on.
Yeah. And also another thing I like is that I switched to Limpub after I did the first book with the publisher and then everything in Limpub. And what I like about it is that I can keep it ongoing, kind of. Oh, when we release a new feature that graduates to beta,
It's easy to update.
I would just update exactly.
And everybody gets the updated version.
Yeah, if I think that there is a checkbox or something like that to receive notification. Is if you did check that, then email is sent whenever I update the book.
Oh, great. So if people here are experts in a material or want to write a book, I guess that's a good choice.
I mean, I do recommend if you want to write a book, I do recommend going with the publisher the first time. It's not weird. It's just silly, but first time kind of you learn the structure, how things work, and you also learn how annoying they are, right? So you won't do it the second time if you ever choose to do so. But first time it's probably helpful.
Okay. Yeah. Good advice.
I have a question about the process. In a book like your book, what is first, the structure of the book, or just the hand-on part, how to organize the, all the material? I'm curious about that.
First of all, you're giving me too much credit if you think that I have any structure.
Okay.
No structure, no plan. I just started writing, right? The only thing that I made in advance, like a decision, was I will not, instead of going first chapter theory, let's talk for 3 hours about something. I don't like that. That's not how my brain works. I'm a very hands-on person. So I actually did all the code first before I wrote a single line.
Okay.
And then I wrote the first chapter in which actually basically I'm showing the final solution at the end, right? Kind of, I want you at the very beginning to make an informed decision, kind of, is this interesting for you or not, right? Not kind of, imagine if it would be Kubernetes, kind of, hey, first chapter, what is a pod? No, and then you spend 3 hours learning about what is a pod, and then, hey, what is a service? This is kind of like, oh, let me show you if this would be Kubernetes, right? Let me show you a fully operational application with everything, kind of service mesh and logging, metrics and stuff. Let me show you the end result, and then you kind of say, you can say, hey, I want to continue, right? Or if it would be a murder mystery novel type of, I would reveal the murderer first, and then go through the trouble of trying to find out who that person is, right?
Yeah, I think it's a good strategy. I think it's a good strategy to show you like the end result, what you're going to achieve, right?
Exactly. At least that's what I tried.
And the order makes sense, right? Like you go also like after you show it, the providers and manage compositions, configurations, and then composition functions, which is a recently new feature, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the order probably makes sense. Kind of, I go from the most basic building blocks and then building on top and on top and on top, and right, kind of. That's how it's structured unintentionally. If you exclude the first chapter, yes.
Yeah. So yeah, go ahead and share your screen and walk us through.
Okay.
See how far we can get today, and then
Okay.
next Friday we'll continue.
And please stop me or ask questions or whatever. I haven't attended previous sessions, so I don't know.
Yeah, people speak, or they will put the question in the chat, and I'll monitor. Sevi also monitors. Some of the organizers monitor the chat, and then we'll ask you the question or rephrase the question from the chat. But we'll watch the chat. Don't worry about the chat.
Cool. So it starts with introduction, which basically doesn't tell you the much at the beginning, except that, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we would be able to extend Kubernetes to manage everything, right? So the whole concept, the idea is, hey, Kubernetes is not only a thingy that runs your applications packaged as containers, but it's much more. It's extensible API, it's a scheduler, it's it has drift detection, reconciliation, so on and so forth. Why wouldn't we use it way beyond containers, right? Which we are already doing, because whenever somebody tells me, yeah, but Kubernetes is not about managing infrastructure, usually my follow-up question is, did you ever deploy Ingress Controller? And if you did, don't you know that it is managing your external load balancer? Don't you use storage in your applications?
EBS,
and so on and so forth. So it is definitely from almost very beginning managing infrastructure, just not in such an obvious way, right? And the goal of Crossplane is to apply all those principles and extend it. Actually, there are two ways to extend it, right? You extend it by installing providers, which I will show later, which enable you to create custom resources that match something in AWS or wherever you're, whatever is the final destination, and then also to create your own APIs and say, in my company, for me, database means this, right? Database for me is a subnets and VPCs and RDS, but for you, database is this, whatever we agreed, right? And kind of creating those abstractions and hiding all the details, or what people these days tend to call developer platforms or what's not, right?
Hey, Victor.
Yes.
Why not use Terraform? It does the same thing, right?
No, it doesn't. So here's a question. I will give you two answers. One answer and one question first, right? Kind of, why do you like actually two questions. Do you like Kubernetes? Do you think it's useful?
Yes.
Okay, why do you like it?
It's one of the more stable platforms, right? It manages our
There must be
state.
something you like. Do you like that it exposes APIs?
Yes.
Okay, cool. That's a reason why not Terraform. What else do you like with Kubernetes? Drift
You
detection,
like the GitOps?
reconciliation.
You like GitOps?
GitOps?
Yeah.
I heard GitOps is a thing. I don't know.
Exactly. I mean, the point is that whatever the reasons are for somebody adopting Kubernetes to manage something packaged as containers, ultimately, those are the same reasons why it's good to use the same principles to manage anything else, right? Just as it's not called containers anymore, but it's WASM, right? There is no good reason why it wouldn't be RDSs, for example, right? Whatever the reasons are, drift detection, reconciliation, APIs, all the good stuff, GitOps, right? To me personally, the biggest advantage of, and I'm not talking about Crossplane, but in general, Kubernetes is the ecosystem, right? So I spent many years, let's say, with Jenkins, and Jenkins was awesome, not awesome anymore. And the thing with Jenkins is that Jenkins had to build the ecosystem by itself, just as Terraform does have to build the ecosystem by itself and anything else. With Kubernetes, it's very different, right? If it's built to run natively in Kubernetes, it means that it works with anything else. Hey, what is your favorite way to synchronize things? Argo CD, cool, Crossplane works with it. How do you want to extract and ship logs? I don't know, like FluentD with Loki, cool, works. Metrics, Prometheus, works, right? Everything works together. And to me, that's the awesome part. Apart from the more obvious things like, again, APIs, drift detection, what's not. I'm not sure whether I'm answering your question, but feel free to fight me on it.
Victor, can I answer?
Yes.
I think Kubernetes we use mostly, I know there are many features, but I think we are using because of the traffic latency, right? We can able to achieve east-west traffic than compared to the other where like than east I mean EC2 or other wherever the lambda or something whatever we have, right?
Yeah, I mean, I hope that that's not the only reason why you're using Kubernetes. Because
No, I mean
that's
major
the
feature,
only reason,
major feature I can talk about, right?
Yeah. I mean, look, let's say that one of the big things for me is that in this day and age, I don't think that anybody should be using anything that is not exposing its interface as API.
Yes.
Right? To me, the difference between Kubernetes and Terraform, let's say, no, it doesn't matter whether it's Crossplane, it's the difference between SSHing and interacting with the API to accomplish something, right? The reason why I like actually AWS is probably the first big example of that, right? What made AWS awesome to me is not because I could create S3 buckets, right? That's not the point. The point is that I have an API with which I can communicate, right? And what's happening behind the scenes, I don't think that anybody should receive, any developer should receive anything but, hey, this is the API, communicate, write UI, I don't care, execute CLI, I don't care anymore, right? That's the API, and you talk to it and you get something.
Actually, that's a good point. You're able to only expose the things that the end user needs to see. So there's a good example. There's a good example. Like some team members have asked, like, "Oh, we're deploying this application. How do I give my application the AWS permissions?" For that, they need to know a whole bunch of things, like what's an IAM role for service account, what's an OIDC. But if you package all of that into composition, then you can include that with the application, and you can hide those details from
into an API. You're packaging it into an API. Composition is just an implementation detail, right?
Right, and also that means you don't have to switch between two different tools. I don't have to go back to Terraform and provision an Ursa. I can do it with all within one tool, which is very nice.
Yeah, and just to be clear, in this case, when I agree completely when you say one tool, but to me, kind of the one tool we really, from the user perspective, is Kubernetes. Now, whether we extended Kubernetes with Crossplane, or maybe Cluster API, or maybe
controller.
Knative, meta controller, doesn't matter. Kind of even Argo is extending, right? Kind of like somebody extends Kubernetes, but for end users, all that is irrelevant. Kind of there is API. I have permissions to create a deployment, and I don't have permissions to manage pods, and that's it, right? I mean, there's more to it, the kind of policies, this or that, but that's the gist of it, right?
Yeah, I think it's the ecosystem is the thing. It's the most useful thing, right? And also finding information, finding blogs, how you do things, the resource model, right? There's a spec, there's a status. Somebody asked me like, where do I put the information? You put in a spec. Where do I get information? I put a status. How do I emit something? There's a Kubernetes event. Like the Kubernetes is your like programming model, right, for operations.
Exactly, and it makes there's another argument that I very often hear that Kubernetes is very complicated to learn, which is, I believe, true. But on the other hand, once you figure it out, then you know everything all of a sudden, right? Like, if I would have Jenkins and Terraform and whatever third tool, doesn't matter, Jira, I need to learn 3 things. In Kubernetes, kind of like once you understand whatever you just said, Carlos, kind of this is where the statuses are. This is that.
That's the programming model with Kubernetes, like labels, right? We use labels to find things, to select things. Use annotations to store metadata information.
Exactly.
That's applicable. And we're talking about containers, or we be talking about load balancers. Or we're talking about ServiceNow tickets that you can create through a Kubernetes controller, right?
Yeah. Exactly. Okay. Anything else? Any other questions, discussions? I like this actually more than me.
And I think I like what you highlighted, because I usually do it in my talks. Is like Crossplane is similar to KubeBuilder. Like both are like tools and frameworks to, at the end of the day, create a controller. But with Crossplane, you're creating controllers on the hood. That there's a container reconciling things, and you can write that in Go. You can write it in Python. You can write it with KubeBuilder. You can write it with Meta Controller, which I use at one point. And all those things, at the end of the day, are creating a controller in Kubernetes. Crossplane actually is the top of the highest of the, with maybe with Meta Controller, but at the end of the day, you're creating behind the scenes CRDs without you knowing it. You're creating controllers without you knowing it. Validation, implementation, webhooks, they're there without you knowing it. And the programming model, you don't have to be an expert on down level of that Kubernetes controller mechanism.
Exactly. And to me, I'm on a mission, or for kind of convincing people that Kubernetes is how we're going to manage stuff, whatever the stuff is. Now, whether it's Crossplane or Meta Controller or whatever else, it's secondary importance. It's Kubernetes controllers, it's CRDs. How you define new API endpoints, you create a CRD. How you define what that something is doing, you create a controller, right? Which tool you use, that's a secondary, that kind of comes afterwards, right? But first step to me is accepting that that's the direction we want to go, right?
Well, I forgot to mention like CAPI. I started learning last week CAPI and Kappa, and then I'm looking into integrating CAPI and Kappa with ACK. ACK is another thing to create controllers in AWS and generating and Go. And then it's creating controllers.
Exactly.
All of them are CRDs.
Exactly. Okay. It's cool.
I think everybody's convinced. I think everybody put a thumbs up. Like Cross is something useful to learn, as many other things, right? So in this case,
okay. If everybody is convinced without me executing a single command, that's awesome. We can all go home. That's it.
You're going to show us how easy it is to use this thing, or how difficult, or what to watch out, right? But I want to learn our best practices, right?
Okay, so let's start with apart from Crossplane. Actually, I set up everything to have Nix packages so that you can run this. No need to install anything. You just execute Nix shell, which I'm not going to do because after that I switched to DevBox. But the same thing.
Similar thing.
Yeah, basically think of DevBox as a user-friendly wrapper around Nix, right?
Okay.
So basically, what I defined is this. This is basically the packages that are needed, kind of bot kind, Kubernetes Helm, kubectl, GAM,
Interesting.
AWS CLI, what's or not, right? And you just execute DevBox shell, which is what I'm doing now, and I don't know, like kubectl, right?
Yeah, you have your
You would see
CLIs.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, I don't have CLIs. The only CLI I have permanently installed on my machine right now is Git and GH.
Oh, nice. Clean machine. You can replace it
Yeah.
next week with another one.
Yeah, and every time I start working on a project, the first thing I do is the DevBox shell, or in the book it's Nix shell, but same thing.
I use devpod. That's the dev container thing, but I'll look into integrating this into devpod because I I run many things in my computer. I don't have horsepower, so I just run devpod with the AWS EC2 instance. But it's a
you can
the Crossplaces interface thing.
You can actually, with the DevBox definition like this, you can run DevBox shell like what I did, but you can also create dev container as well if you want. Same definition.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. So that's what you're more comfortable with, or what you like, and what's not.
We're putting in our Argo CD. I'm working on a PR to put like a .dev container in all these repos.
Yeah. This next thing I'm going to execute is this. I use Teller heavily to load all the credentials I need. I can show you the Teller. Nothing to do with Crossplane. Basically, every project I have has DevBox and Teller, which basically gives me all the keys or secrets, passwords as environment variables, right? So no need to type anything, no need to store anything anywhere. Okay, so let me, each chapter actually starts with the setup script, which sets up everything. In this case, it's going to set up a lot, but it might take a while. But basically, what I wanted to do in the book is that the moment you finish a chapter, there is a script to destroy everything, if you choose to do so. And then the next chapter, you start from scratch and execute setup for that chapter, and it will set up everything that is required from before.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so kind
also
of
for testing your book as you write it.
Yeah. So right now it created the kind cluster. It is installing Crossplane. It will configure it. It will do whatever needs to be done. And then the rest of the chapter always focuses on what matters for that chapter, whatever that is, right?
This is the user experience that I think every, not necessarily this specific tool, but this is the like one command, like get up and working that all these CNCF projects should have. I was doing a live stream this week on Armada, and in 1 hour I couldn't get it working in kind. Like they didn't have like something like this of like run this one command.
I hate that kind of. To me, when I try a new tool, if I cannot,
has that. We have that in the repo. We should put
I
something like
started
that.
this conversation by saying that I wrote a book because our documentation sucks.
Victor, I see that you have installed the Istio as well. Any specific reason behind? Because this is only for the infrastructure, right?
I installed what?
Istio. I see Istio you installed, right? On top of that, we saw Istio installation.
Is there Istio?
I don't know whether I installed Istio.
No, there's no Istio.
I saw that Istio. That's what I saw. Yeah.
Oh yeah, there is a Helm chart.
No, this is Helm
update.
Repo update, and then this is one of the charts I have there. But let me just correct something. I think that Crossplane, just as Kubernetes, the way I see Kubernetes is that containers were the beachhead. That's what was required to start to entice people to use it, right? Not necessarily the end game. Crossplane is not about managing infrastructure. I want to make that clear. It's about managing resources, which can be infrastructure or it can be anything else. I don't know, kind of, you can manage your GitHub repositories. That's probably not infrastructure. You can manage your AWS Lambda. That's kind of...
Giving an example I recently gave was the Elgato lights have APIs. So you can have like turn on your Elgato lights because it has an API.
Exactly.
An HTTP
Whatever
API.
has, that's actually whatever is a resource that has an API that can be used to manage it is eligible to be manageable by Crossplane. Yes. Elgato Lights, yes. Why not? I don't remember. I forgot who. I know that somebody made a provider to manage to order Domino pizzas, Domino APIs.
Yeah. I think Justin even I think it was Justin wrote one, and I think he went to get the pizza and he recorded YouTube short.
There you go. Also, I made sure that I tested to death everything, and I tested everything in all three major providers. So Azure, AWS, Google Cloud, all works in a book, and every chapter changes. You can do chapter in any of the three, but then the examples in a chapter that you see in a book are always switching from one to another, so that nobody gets offended, right?
So do you have GitHub Actions that test this? If somebody wants to contribute, like unit testing or end-to-end test for your book?
No. I wanted to do that, but then I got lazy.
I'm asking, no, not for you, but I'm telling people in this audience, if you want to get involved with the repo and learn, like that's a task that they can help in the repo, or fork it and then implement the GitHub action.
Oh yeah.
So there'll be new versions of the providers, the new version of Crossplane. I usually test that by hand.
One tool that I'm not sure whether I put it in a book or not, but one tool I started really liking lately is Chainsaw from Caverno.
Yeah. I've been looking
absolutely
at that
amazing.
For Canoe. I think we're going to use it for Canoe examples. Yeah.
So Victor, your book is there in the market now?
In the market, it's in Limpub and
I can
Amazon.
put the link in the chat. Oh, is it also in Amazon? Okay. I got it from Limpub. Limpub.com/crossplane. I put the link in the chat.
I think that I always give Limpub by default because I think that Limpub is better. It gives you updates.
Yep,
if I fix something, new chapter, whatever, in Amazon, I'm not sure how that works.
And it's in my library. I have other books in there, so and it show up in the library. In my library.
Yes, to David Fox. Yes, I was referring to Caverno Chainsaw. Yes.
Yeah, Caverno Chainsaw. I can put the link.
So,
somebody wants to put the link in the notes.
I was a heavy user of Cuttle, Kuttl.
Yeah.
Which is awesome because it was the only one.
Well, there's a thing when there's like one open source project, right? That's the best one and the worst one.
Exactly. Just like my go-to tool for managing schemas was Schema Hero. Again, terrible tool. Don't use it, but it was the only one.
I think Atlas is now coming.
Atlas is amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so everything is ready, right? Kind of like now I should be ready to, actually I'm almost ready to start the chapter. At the end of that script, the idea is always to load env variables, basically that contain all the environment variables that might be needed or were generated.
Hey, Victor, when you executed that dev box, what happened? I see a bunch of things.
I don't think it was a script.
No. I executed script set this one. Basically, each chapter has a script. And I also, another thing, nothing to do with Crossplane that I love is GUM. I don't know if any of you used.
No.
From Charm Bracelet Charm is my favorite group of projects. It's all the different tools to make, so I can do like, echo, this is a chapter and pass it to GUM format. No, GUM I didn't load, actually. I don't know why not.
It's not in the chat. It's not in the show.
No, I think that there we go. Right?
Oh, GUM.
Yeah, absolutely amazing tool. If you do this, you will see that I use it. For example, here, GUM, choose Google. So this one, for example, is a CLI command that allows you to choose something, and a bunch of nice. It's a CLI commands that makes it look, your scripts make look like they are interactive. They become interactive kind of type of solution and pretty and what's not, but nothing to do with Crossplane. What does matter is that And you will see that I use hyperscaler variable a lot. Intro YAML, because all the manifests are made for all three major hyperscalers. What did I do?
There's a typo at the end. No?
Let's see this. There we go. There we go. Right. This is the manifest that the Big Bang at the very beginning. Let me show you the end result. This is the manifest. Basically, these are the what we call claims. Basically, they're ways how somebody can create instances of whatever you defined in Kubernetes by creating CRDs, essentially, right? Compositions. And so this would be me being a developer now and saying, hey, I would like a cluster, right? So I'm going to create something called cluster claim. This does not come out of the box. You will see later, you creating Crossplane, those new interfaces.
And Victor,
yeah.
one aspect about claim, maybe to clarify, like a lot of maybe people don't know what the claim term comes from. Like I usually use the PVC, like persistent volume claim.
Exactly.
Right? That is I'm asking for something, and then the persistent vol is actually the thing that I get.
Exactly. It's actually comes from there. I'm asking for a cluster, right? I want to claim a cluster, and you will see later what will happen when I do that. But yeah, it comes from persistent volume claims. At least that's the first example that I know.
Yeah, that's the one that comes to my mind.
So the schema for this is custom, and you will see it later. But in this case, that hypothetical developer would call that cluster 01. It would use labels to decide where the cluster should run. In this case, in my case, it will be AWS EKS, and and it will decide that to have small nodes. I'm intentionally not using here. I'm saying, hey, you can define small, medium, and large, and something behind the scenes will figure out how to translate small to T2 something in AWS, right? And it will start with 3 nodes.
Yeah. And so then this convention of like this names, node size, and ID, somebody came up with. This is not Crossplane specific fields or from the project or anything. This is your own conventions.
Yeah. So this is me creating. I created a scheme.
You're creating an API.
Exactly. This is a custom resource definition, CRD. Actually, you can see actually by the API, right? DevOps Toolkit series, nothing to do with Crossplane, nothing to do with anything, right? This was created by me, and I will show later how. And I will create a secret that is required to create a root password for the database. Doesn't matter. What does matter is a second claim. Hey, I want the database as well. And I want it to be in AWS, and I want it to be Postgres. And I want this version and this size. And inside of that database server, I want to have one database called SillyDemoDB, right? Again, custom interface. You will see it later. For now, just kind of, I'm trying to show the end result from the developer perspective. And finally, I want to claim an application. And I want it to be a backend application. So you can imagine with those labels, you can select different combinations of whatever is offered, whomever is creating those APIs. But in this case, I want a backend application connected to the database. I want it to run remotely somewhere else. And I want it to be in this namespace. This is the image of the database. This is the port. This is the host. And this is the secret of where that database, where that application, in which cluster should that application run. And basically this is, sorry, my bad. This is the secret of the database that application should connect to. Database doesn't exist now, right? That will be created soon with this claim.
This is the developer saying, please, Mr. API creator, put the secrets in this secret that I'm going to use or read from.
Actually, the secret will be automatically created by this claim, among other things, and it will be called SillyDemoDB. When the database is created, secret will be the same name. But when you create an application, this kind of decoupled from the database, you can say, yeah, but you know what? I want that application to be connected to the database through the secret that happens to be the same as the name of the database. And I want it to be in the cluster called cluster 01, which is the first claim that I showed before, right? So I will create a cluster, and I will create a database, and I will create an application in that cluster and connect it to that database, right? So if you will translate this to, and you will see later, to direct YAML for all those resources, that would be like a couple of thousand lines of YAML that somebody would need to write, right?
Well, I thought you were going to say if you want to translate it into a Swagger API, right? That it becomes an HTTP that I can do curl, right? This should be the definition of that Swagger that somebody would call.
Exactly.
I have a question. Can I ask you something?
Anything. Okay, I like the conversation talking for long. So yes, please do.
Yeah, sorry if the question is a little bit dummy. I'm still learning a little bit of. I'm in an early stage with Crossplane. So I was wondering, for instance, when you create a resource like a database, the proper configuration of the database, in which stage is managed? I mean, the configuration could be the table space, or some sort of configuration of the resource. In which stage will happen in this part when you connect it with Crossplane, or later on you run some sort of a script to
like tables? You mean?
Yeah, tables, roles inside of the database.
So is the question kind of like when happens what?
When happen the configuration
the database tables? What happens?
Yeah, the database
does it happen
tables.
now or later? Who's in charge of creating the tables inside the database?
In this example, I did not. Let me show you another example. Just give me a second to find an example.
Yeah, for instance.
Okay, I'm going to mock it. So actually, let me jump. Second.
Or at least for this example, you're not going to create a table with Crossplane. I think
I'm not going to do it in this example, but I'm going to show you how you could do it. So this is where my those compositions are published. And if I go to .sql, the one for the database, this is the documentation of what I'm doing right now. And XRD, basically, this is the full schema of everything that I could do, but I'm not doing necessarily. And here you can see that you can define schemas field. And one big field for this is actually an array, and you can have an array of databases. First, the database, not the server, but the database where you want to apply the schema, and schema just as pure SQL.
Yeah.
Now, if I would specify that, the composition would actually deploy. It would deploy Atlas operator, which we mentioned earlier. And instruct it it would convert those SQLs into whatever Kubernetes resources are required for Atlas operator and connections and what's not, right? So you would just specify this if you would need schemas.
Okay.
Basically, the point is that you're in control of defining both the interface, CRD, right? And what are all the things that a controller should do. If you need schema, you just bake it in.
So you can provide the resource plus the configuration of the resource if you need it for whatever situation, business case you are.
Anything that can.
Or if the application needs a config map, you will add it also, I guess, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you would. So you will see later. Composition is a collection of resources that can be optional, and you can say, "Hey, I want to create a configuration map." Cool, create it. I want to talk to AWS. Yeah, talk to it, right? Whatever you want to do. I mean, it's not whatever you want to do. Whatever you want to do, as long as there is a provider for that enables you to do that something. And one of the providers is Kubernetes provider that allows you to create any Kubernetes resource as part of it. Like I'm doing with
Helm. So one for Helm also very useful to deploy a Helm chart.
Thank you.
How long, Victor? How long does it take for a provider to catch up with the new features?
Depends on the type of provider. So for the big three like AWS, Azure, and Google, it's relatively fast now because we have a mechanism to transform to code generate whatever we need. That's called Abjet. Now there are some other providers like I'm inventing. Let's say Datadog provider, right? That is managed by Datadog folks, right? And then that depends on them. It's similar like with other tools. Terraform makes sure that the major modules are always relatively fast updated, but then there are many others managed by random people and depends on them, right? Okay, so what I did is I just copied this to the A-team directory, which the setup script already installed Argo CD, and Argo CD is watching this directory, to make it clear. What I'm going to do is push it now. Sorry. I'm going to push it to Git, and that's it, right? That YAML gets pushed to Git, and that's the nice thing I was mentioning before. It works with any other Kubernetes native tool. You want Argo CD or Flux? Cool, works. And now if I output cluster claims and SQL claims and app claims, there is nothing. That's probably because Argo CD did not figure it out. I think that by default is set to synchronize every minute or something like that. So one moment, unless I messed it up at the very beginning.
Oh, so that's the reason that I like this. That's the reason at the beginning of the book you run the GitHub CLI to create a fork. That way the user has write access to their repo and not your repo, and you can use Argo CD for the excellence.
Yeah, exactly. And that's featuring probably one of the 5 tools CLIs I cannot live without. That would be GH.
Yeah, I learned that today. So another thing I learned today for so folks who want to like keep up, I use the GitHub CLI, but I was not aware from the GitHub CLI I was able to do that thing that you do with the mouse of forking the repo into your account. And Victor actually knows the CLI very well, and he was able to do fork -- clone -- remote, and that's why it did the trick, and that's why you can use Argo CD so easy from here.
Exactly, and there we go. Now it was pushed to Git, Argo CD synchronized it, and now you can see that those 3.
But we see errors. Victor, what's wrong? This tool doesn't work. I see a lot of like the word error everywhere.
You will continue seeing errors for approximately 20 minutes, more or less.
That's the bug in Crossplane, I guess.
Exactly. It cannot create a control plane, and it cannot create a node pool. And by the way, those are also custom outputs, right?
So it's so if there's an error, it's not like Argo that it stops and it doesn't try again unless you put like retries. Or I heard somebody complaining about that somewhere.
I know who you're referring to. So let me show you this. kubectl get managed. This is a very heavy operation.
Heavy operation, yes.
Now those are now all the resources that were created from those 3 YAMLs, right? You can see that subnet group is not even synchronized. It cannot even start.
Nope.
Instance is also not synchronous, cannot start. Actually, maybe nothing is working. Okay. Database, some objects, which is Kubernetes resources, will be created in that cluster. They also couldn't start yet. Some roles, some role policy attachments, node group, cluster out, add-ons, VPC, subnets, and so on and so forth, right? Those are all the resources that are now managed by those 3 controllers, right? When I said I want cluster and I want SQL, in this case RDS and what's not, and I want application, those 3 expanded controller created all those resources, right? Some are in AWS, some are will be in the cluster, and what's not. And what matters is that some of them are synchronized, meaning that synchronized means that Crossplane can start working on it. Say again?
That's a VPC route. So it looks like some resources were waiting for the VPC to be ready.
Yeah. So some are ready, but for example, if you look at this one, route table association, it's not yet ready. But this one, route table association could not even start being created. And that's probably because it required data from something else. So the way Crossplane resources themselves do not have dependency. You cannot say, I depend on this resource. What you can say is that I need data from that resource.
I require that value to be
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. I depend on data, on values from some other resource, and until that resource has that value, there is nothing I can do. I'm going to wait until it. So basically, there is no orchestration. You don't specify, oh, do this and then do this and then do this. You just say, hey, this thing requires value from that thing, go. And Crossplane will try to create all of those resources at once. Some will fail, some will not. And those that fail, it will try again and again and again until eventually it succeeds. And we have a CLI helper like this one that says, hey, trace, give me cluster claim called cluster01 in this namespace, and give me the tree of resources that are related with that claim. And then you see something like this, and you can see, okay, so when you created this cluster claim, it created a composition, which is almost the same thing, but on a cluster level. And then within that composition, you got Internet Gateway, main route table association, and so on and so forth, right? And some of them are finished, available. Some of them are still throwing errors, right? Errors are normal. It's to be expected.
Yeah, that was
I
a joke.
cannot
I was
do
talking at the
this.
beginning. I wanted you. Yeah.
Exactly. No, I know. And basically, you cannot. It cannot work on cluster authentication because to create cluster authentication, it needs the cluster, and the cluster is right now being created. Right now, this will take a couple of more moments.
But Victor, going back to what we were saying about, like, because everything's Kubernetes, everything works the same. So these first two columns, that is sync and ready, those are status conditions. So all the tooling in the world that can read status conditions around the ecosystem, now you can be used to say, like, when is this sync and when is it ready for doing the next thing in your platform, right?
Exactly. It's just standard Kubernetes. I mean, actually, let's do this. kubectl describe cluster. Now, which one? I have too many EKS, right? And you can see that there are events like you would normally have from Kubernetes.
Monitoring tools can get those events and give you a dashboard, right?
Exactly. I mean, for example, if you like using Lens to manage stuff in Kubernetes cluster, you can use it, right?
Yep.
Or anything else.
And the status, you were going to show the status.
Yeah, status. Let's do this actually, not describe. Let's do get cluster 01 and YAML, right? And you can see here,
I like the
status,
YAML,
right?
Yep.
Last transaction time, it was successfully, right now it is successfully reconciled, meaning that it has all the information it needs to start creating it, and it is creating the cluster. Eventually,
and ready is false, right?
Yes, the ready. This is the ready field, and it is false, right? And there are two main fields. Synced means that, yeah, I have the information I need. I can start doing something. And ready means, well, ready. Yeah, so this will take a while. In the meantime, I can do the same commands. Crossplane beta trace for other, like for SQL claim. You will see some others. And application should be everything should be errored in application. See? And that's because this application is supposed to run in that cluster, which is not yet created, right? So it just errors to that because it tries to find out where the cluster is and how to connect to it and what to do in it, right?
So that's a question from Joshua. It says, is the provider doing any dependency resolution, or does it make a lot of like failed and invalid AWS API calls?
No, so
when sync is false, I guess.
When sync is false, it is not going to API, right?
Nope.
Because it doesn't have the information it needs to go to the API. Once it gets the information it needs, then it goes to API and then interacts with it and starts doing whatever it's doing, right? So sync false means I'm not yet ready. I don't have the information I need.
Yep. And then once this, so it does a valid call to AWS API. And then after that, because maybe it takes 15 minutes for an EKS cluster, a database takes 5 minutes. Not that I know those numbers top of my head, but then the reconcile controller itself has a timer of like, for example, every 1 minute you can tune that to go back to the API and do a valid request like, are you ready? Are you ready? And then that's why it's putting here creating, and then like until like 15 minutes, it will do it 15 times, and then eventually we'll get back like the database is created, the cluster is created, and then move from ready false to ready true. But no invalid API. It's like that would be kind of like bad, because then the cloud provider will say like you're like doing denial of service, or you're calling like errors, like what's going on.
That's the major difference between Crossplane or Kubernetes, right, and non-Kubernetes tools. Normally, if you would use some other tool, whichever, it would be locked and it would be kind of waiting for things to happen. Crossplane doesn't wait for anything. Hey, AWS, create EKS, and I'll come back to you what Carlos was explaining a minute later to see how you're doing.
Sebi has another call. Silly question. No questions are silly. Sorry, Sebi. Cloud providers wouldn't throttle API calls if in any way, would they? I don't know. If I create 1 million clusters, Victor, what happens?
You will. You might need to change the frequency of doing those calls. Yes.
Yeah. So you can control that in the controllers. Like maybe go every 1 hour, right? Or things. The thing is,
exactly.
This is just to check. But if you're going to create a new cluster right away, controller wakes up instantly and then it tries.
Oh yeah.
And then if you're creating a 1 million EKS cluster, give me a call. I'll give you more API limit. I'll erase it.
Actually, the problem is the problem with API limits is not that much when creating, because you're unlikely to create million Kubernetes clusters at once. It's more like for later, because that loop never stops.
Yeah.
Right. When my cluster is created, it will continue going to AWS and asking, "Hey, this is what I think the cluster is. Tell me what it is, and if there is any drift, it will reconcile it." Right. So the same logic as with pods, right? If a pod goes down, Kubernetes will create it. If it's different than what it's supposed to be, it will update it and so on and so forth, right?
Yeah, which is beautiful when you do this and then somebody by mistake goes to the cloud provider, doesn't matter, console, and then remove like a firewall rule, right? And then like, well, that's kind of a mistake. I didn't meant to do that. And then the drift detection of Kubernetes, right? That's reconciling the desired state is the state that I want. You can configure like leave it like that or like put it back as I desired.
Yeah.
So security audits are very good to like, at least for certain scenarios I've seen, like they love it because like there's no way to show you like there's drift because I'm using tools that make sure that the drift is not happening.
Exactly. But yeah, you can, you might need, I'm going to Robert's question. I've seen EKS control planes become unusable because of badly configured Kubernetes operator was quitting. Yes, I mean, you might, depending on how big, how many resources you have, you might need to fine tune the frequency.
Oh, I think I know that Robert's saying something, I think from the past. This was true when we had one outbound provider that has 1,000 APIs and CRDs. And then the controller was hitting the EKS API server, or the controller, the Kube API server. And for fairness, it was having a lot of issues. And Outbound has a multiple blog posts that they work, I think I saw the first one like 3 years ago, but then they split that provider into provider families. So now you don't have to install all the CRDs. You just install like the minimums that you want.
Okay. I misunderstood. I thought it was talking about the APIs on the other end. If you're talking about Kubernetes APIs, yes, we had. So actually, I'm very proud of this.
Yes.
That Crossplane is probably the first project that found the limits of how many custom resources you can have in Kubernetes cluster. I doubt that anybody ever had Kubernetes cluster before Crossplane with, let's say, 2,000 CRDs, right?
Yeah, we can find the GitHub issue in Kubernetes repo. I think it was from 3 years ago or something like that.
So
Um,
in general,
Nick opened the issue, I think.
exactly. And it depends really on the size of control plane nodes in your cluster. But generally speaking, around 800 to 1000, around 800 CRDs works fine. And then if you go beyond that, you would need bigger control planes, because it's etcd heavy. And that's when what Carlos said, we split the providers. So instead of in the past, when you install AWS provider, let's say, you get approximately 1,000 CRDs
1,000
because there are
CRDs.
1,000 endpoints in AWS, right? Now, and then we split it and said, okay, you can install separate API groups like EC2, right, which gives you, I don't know, maybe 50 or 100 or whatever, right, and RDS and so on and so forth. So you pick and choose which parts of AWS, in this case, you want. And then it's fine.
I need to drop, but Sevi can close the session. So thank you, folks, for joining.
Yeah. And let's see now. Any other questions you might have is a good moment, because I need to wait until the Kubernetes cluster is ready. Yes, please.
Yeah. So is the dependency between resources, is that preserved on deletion? I'm thinking about Terraform. Like most of the dependencies are taken care of, but in some instances you might have to explicitly state that depends on.
Yes. So that's one thing we realized, that we don't need dependencies when creating, but we do need when deleting, because here's an example, right? I'm creating an object, which means in this cluster, I will apply some Kubernetes resource, whatever, creating a namespace. And then if I delete this one, and if it deletes Kubernetes cluster before it deletes that resource, it will say, hey, I cannot reach it, right? So yes, there is alpha feature right now that allows you to specify the deletion order of resources when you delete a claim or a composition. It's in alpha. We tend to keep alphas relatively long time until alpha does not necessarily mean that it's not good, but more that it might change the API. And when we are sure that the API will not change, then it becomes beta, and that's it. But yes, you can specify the order of deletion of stuff.
Hey, Victor, quick
yes.
question. Is there anything like rollback, or it's always keeps trying?
Rollback, not baked into Crossplane, but you can do rollback whichever way you're doing it in Kubernetes. Kind of, that's the beauty of it, right? You could, I haven't tried it, but theoretically you could use Flagger or Argo rollouts or whatever you want for that, right? We're intentionally trying not to add the features that other similar non-Kubernetes tools have, simply as long as those features are available in Kubernetes one way or another, right? So whatever way you would roll back something in Kubernetes, that works with Crossplane.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question, please, regarding CRDs. So basically, Crossplane is based on CRDs to create things, right? Which are cluster-wide resources, right? And for example, if you work with like Kubernetes, which you allow a team to work only on specific namespace, not cluster-wide resources or cluster-wide permissions, how can they create things from their own namespace? They cannot, right? If they cannot manage the CRDs.
No, so CRDs are definitions are cluster scoped, but what we call claims, the one that I created, for example, for this cluster, that's namespace scoped, right? So the resources themselves are cluster scoped, but what people create is actually namespaced.
So the cluster is namespaced, but
so this is namespaced. This is running. So if I do kubectl, I forgot the namespace. Let me see. Where did I put it? A team probably. Namespace a team get. There we go. Those three cluster claims, SQL claim, and app claim that I created by pushing it to Git. Those are namespace. They are right now in 18. The resources created from them are cluster scoped.
Exactly. So those should be, for example, managed by the operator, the Kubernetes administrator, which I'll only
not managed. So operator creates those controllers, right? So we call them compositions. So operator decides what will happen when somebody creates namespace scoped, in this case, cluster claim, right? And then that expands into, you know, all those VPCs and subnets and RDSs and what's not that you saw before. So you're creating, so think of operator as being service provider, right? Just as AWS is service provider to operator, and AWS would create some API endpoint called EC2, right? And behind the scenes, nobody knows what's happening, right? Not your problem. AWS designs the service and gives it a name and exposes it through an API. The same thing here, right? You create a service. In this case, I created the service called cluster and SQL and app. And I designed what will, actually, I can show you that if you, well, let me see, marketplace. So if I go back to the composition that I showed, let's say .kubernetes, right? Now, this is the schema I already showed, right? Those are the fields that you can use to define cluster as a user, as a developer, let's say, right? But what matters is that if I go back, if I open the Git repo, this is the repo where my source code is. And if you look at the package and then compositions, you will see that, okay, so here I'm specifying, hey, whenever somebody specifies a composition called, where is it? Composite cluster. And the labels are, in this case, GKE and Google. This is the pipeline that should be executed. Do this. And in this case, I'm saying, yeah, I want to create a cluster, and I want to create a node pool, and I want to create this or that, right? You're defining all the resources that should be created based on that custom resource that somebody applied, right? So you're defining what are all the details, all the resources that should be expanded. And by the way, this some people would do in pure YAML, but since maybe half a year ago, we created something called functions that you can write your compositions in YAML, or you can use it, write it in any programming language. Like in this case, I'm using KCL. I like KCL, and I'm just defining pipeline of resources that should be defined in KCL as a language, right? You can use any language you want to define what are all the resources and all the conditions and loops and what's not that should be. And this is all that I'm scrolling right now. That was all for Google Cloud, for GKE, and then Azure, and all those things are Azure. More and more and more and more and more and more and more. And wait, these are still the smaller ones. And then, but if somebody selects his labels that they want it in same cluster, but in AWS, then this is what should happen, right?
Victor, let's take another question and wrap up this session because we're already over time.
If I'm diluting I didn't finish the first chapter. I hope that's okay. I think
that's fine. We have
right?
the same problem. If the conversation is really fun and juicy, we tend to take forever for one chapter. So, okay. Is there any question from the audience for Victor? Oh, I actually can see one from the chat. So, Victor, you wrote a book on Java test-driven development with cross-plane compositions. Do you recommend a similar approach? From Robert.
For testing compositions.
Yeah, let's see if Robert is still here with us. Robert, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, yes, sure. Yeah. So for me, I think compositions are really powerful as opposed to Terraform, where you've got the plan which you look at, and you've got the apply. For me, takes people. My background's in Java development as well, so testing is really important, and it seems that these are very powerful things. Compositions, the automatic reconciliation. So for me, testing everything that's been built would seem to be very paramount. I know we can put Kyverno in to protect things from going bad, but I would imagine that these things can get quite complicated, and so testing must be a very important thing.
Absolutely. So what I do myself personally, when I write anything, I have my Visual Studio Code split into two screens. On one side, there is terminal where I execute a watcher that runs tests every single time I make any change to anything. I have continuous run execution of tests in the background, and then I write my stuff. In the case of Kubernetes compositions in KCL or whatever I'm doing, and I'm using Kyverno Chainsaw. So those are my tests, for example, that I'm saying. You can see here, apply this, and then assert that. Apply this, assert that. Apply assert, apply assert, apply assert. And let me show you one example. So assert, for example, is saying, hey, yeah, when you create a cluster claim, I expect this to be created, and I expect this to be created. So basically, I have a set of manifests that I use to assert what is the expected behavior. So all those. My first test is that all those, 1,000 lines of YAML are expected in the first round of tests. So when I create those, when I apply those 13 lines, I expect those 1,000 lines to happen in my cluster. And that's Kyverno Chainsaw, at least in my case.
Thank you.
Yeah, personally, luckily, I don't have that power in my company, but if I would fire anybody writing any type of code, not testing, but TDD. People would hate me if I would have that power.
I think that's a very good conversation to keep going, because we're still investigating the software engineering practices and introducing them into platform engineering, as far as I understand, right? So,
To me, it's very simple. Yeah. If you write code, and just to clarify, when I say code, I mean something interpretable by machine. Whether it's Go or Java or YAML, I don't care what type of code it is. If it can be interpreted by machine, it's code. And if you write code without testing it, luckily, I cannot fire you, but I would.
That's fun. Okay. Victor, are you ready for us to wrap up this session?
Yeah, I think that you saw the first chapter, not necessarily everything from the first chapter.
Yeah.
But you need to trust me that database was created, and cluster was created, and application was deployed in that cluster, and it was connected to the database, and we live happily ever after. That's the end result of the rest of the chapters. You saw the end, the murderer. The rest of the chapters go from the beginning.
Brilliant. Okay. I also read the first chapter, haven't had a chance to try it myself, so I trust you, but I'll try it at home. When I'm
back. Disappointed that I write books in a way that they're almost unreadable without touching the keyboard. I don't know how you did it. I failed.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for the session, and thanks everyone for joining us. And hope to see you next week. We'll keep going with the Crossplane bug, and hopefully Victor will be joining us as well.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I have a flight. I'm arriving home 1 hour and a half with the plane. Unless it's delayed, I'll be here.
Right. No problem. No problem. Then we can get you covered. Okay. Thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Cheers, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Victor. That was a really fun session.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for having me. It was so much fun. Yeah.
Yeah. The conversation was really nice. Like, I mean, we didn't have this, the chat being this busy and like conversation happening here and there at all, to be honest.
To be honest, whenever I do some public talk, doesn't matter what it is, if there are no questions, I consider it a failure. Kind of like, okay, so you're bored. Or it's too advanced, or it's too basic, or something, right?
Yeah, and I would definitely hit you with more testing questions on platform stuff. So, yeah, that's
Big
what I'm
anytime.
dealing with right now. Yeah, thank you, Victor. I'll close the session now so that the recording will be stopped. Okay, bye.
Cheers.
Have a
Bye-bye.
nice weekend. Cheers. So nice to meet you.
Cheers.